My car, it was parked at the side of this long stretch of highway. I'm like a zombie in my navy blue suit and tie, a well-dressed corporate zombie. Snow is crushing beneath my feet, briefcase hanging off my arm. There's a clearing in the forest. I lay down on my back, and I gently place my briefcase on my chest. I close my eyes, and then, wolves! The wolves, they start tearing my body apart limb by limb. It's over. I'm finally at peace. Until I wake up, I'm soaked in sweat. I feel like there's a steel band clamped around my chest. I can hardly breathe. My heart, it's pounding like I'm having a heart attack. And then my wife rolls over and says, "Are you okay, hon?" To which I say, "Yeah, I'm okay." Have you ever had one of those nightmares? The kind that comes from being stressed out about work or life? The kind that you want to tell somebody about, but you don't? You see, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and CEOs, sometimes we feel that way. But many of us, we don't talk about the stresses, the anxiety flare-ups, the depression. No. We stay silent, living the stigma of mental health and carrying on like we're okay, even when we're not okay. The difference between living the stigma of mental health and lifting that stigma is silence. Living the stigma of mental health, it makes you feel that if you tell anyone that at times you struggle with anxiety, depression, loneliness, loneliness from being in isolation, that they just might see you as someone who will crack and melt into this emotional puddle, incapable, unreliable, broken. I started my journey to the top in silence, broken emotionally from a broken childhood that grew into an emotionally broken adulthood. But that's not what I showed the world, no. You see, they called me a high achiever. But the truth is, I was just this self-worth chaser. I took the ground floor elevator fast right up to what they called the penthouse, but I never stopped to take a look at any of those floors in between. No way. That's right. I became a CEO by the age of 31. But living the stigma, convinced that sharing my stories of struggle would only show weakness, I honestly thought it would hurt my career. But the real kick in the ass is it wasn't until you become a CEO that you realize what the true meaning of those three letters is. You see, the reality is, when you become a CEO, you can expect to crack emotionally often. But they don't tell you that on the ride up, and they certainly don't tell you that you're probably gonna crack like Humpty Dumpty, and you have to put yourself back together again, because none of those king's horses and king's men, they're not there to help you. And they certainly don't tell you that it's okay to say when you're not okay. And that's why many of us, we start filling those cracks with booze, drugs, porn, whatever we can find, hoping no one will notice us. Here's the deal. When the floor of that penthouse starts to crack, because the business leader, the entrepreneur, the CEO hasn't budgeted the time or the money or even their own courage to take care of their mental health, the ceilings of all those floors below can start to cave in, landing on the hardworking people below. And the integrity and the strength of the entire structure can become compromised. And you see, it's at that point that I believe that everyone's state of mental health is at risk of falling victim to the instability above. When I'm above, keeping all my secrets to myself, it's because I felt shame. I feared judgment. I wasn't just living the stigma of mental health. I was feeding that monster. Living the stigma of mental health, it makes you feel that if you tell anyone that at times you struggle with anxiety and depression, they might just see you as someone who will crack. Living the stigma and not talking about it in the workplace, that's the biggest barrier to improving it. But you see, lifting that stigma and creating a safe place for all of us to have an honest conversation, Now that's the direction we need to move in. But real change, real lasting change, it starts with the courage to change yourself. Here's the thing. When leaders fail to make their mental health a priority, they undermine the importance of the mental health of all the people that they're leading. Leaders, we need to show that our strength is in our stories of struggle and not in our silence, and that it's okay to say when we're not okay. But I didn't know that. So there I am, I'm working all the time. Is anybody out there like that? Keeping all my nightmares inside. I'm holding everything up in between those cracks. Tommy gun. Tommy gun, that's what they called me. I was a hired gun executive, and boards and bosses used to hire me and bring me in to turn companies around. But as long as I can remember it, no matter what the cost, I was always under that gun to give those boards and bosses the results that they wanted. Never did I think that my own mental health could fall victim to my high achiever lifestyle. No. And I never thought that a brain injury could happen to me. I mean, who thinks like that? But I guess when you're always on the job, sometimes you don't realize how close you are to falling into one of those cracks. Maybe it's a business failure, losing someone you love, an accident. 19 months ago, I completed the ride to conquer cancer. It was incredible. I bicycled 225 kilometers over 2 days. It was up and down hills in the sun and in the rain. What an amazing experience that was. And what a great cause, right? Except I couldn't sit down for 2 days after. But what wasn't part of the plan was to fall the next day that cracked that bathtub with my head. And for the first time in my life, my brain, it didn't want to work anymore. A concussion caused a fog it was hard to think through. A light, it started hurting my eyes. My anxiety and my depression started spiraling out of control. And while the crack in the floor of the penthouse became too large, my fall, it was hard and fast. But I was still trying to hide it, I was kind of like the Black Knight in Monty Python's quest for the Holy Grail. 'Tis but a scratch. It's only a flesh wound. I am invincible. The Black Knight always prevails. Right, yeah, living the stigma. But I want to be serious with you all for just a moment here. Because for the first time in my life, I had thoughts of suicide. And it scared the hell out of me. And then my silent stories, they started seeping out in the quiet corners of my psychologist's office, like some dark and dirty confessions of a zombie laying on that forest floor. A well-dressed corporate zombie. It was shocking to me the little regard I had for my own mental health, and not to mention the mental health of all the hardworking people below, including my family. Oh yeah, and then there's my therapist. She's a real smart lady. You got to get one of these. She says to me that day in the quiet corner of her dimly lit room, she says, Tom, you need to go get a job that works your body so you can start healing your mind. What? What is she talking about? Get a job that works my body? Does she want me to be an exotic dancer or something? I was still so lost in this whole experience, I didn't argue with her. No, sir. I did not argue. You want to know what I did? After getting a checkup from the neck up that day with her, I traded my CEO position for a ground floor side hustle with another company. But this time, I parked my car alongside what was called the receiving dock. And it was massive. It was all on one floor, and there was no penthouse in sight. There I am, walking step by step in my neon orange safety vest, blue jeans, steel-toed shoes scraping across the pavement, lunch kit hanging off my arm. I really thought the wolves had had their way with me. I wish this was all a dream, but it wasn't. No, sir. It was my first day as a produce stalker and graveyard shift. But I was still so deeply rooted in this stigma. So I wore my black runner's cap and I grew a stubble because I was terrified that someone from the corporate world would notice me there. I never forget the first night. It was like yesterday. There I was, lifting heavy boxes of fruits and vegetables with all my fellow workers. And you know what? Some of them, they started telling me their stories of struggle. And I realized very quickly that all people want at work sometimes is to be honest and talk about how they're feeling, right? And I became a safe place for some of them. You know, watching these courageous people being open and honest and sharing their stories of struggle with me, that's the first time I saw their strength. You know, they say courage is contagious, and thank goodness I caught it from them. And I reached down deep and found my own courage. And I broke the silence and started sharing my stories with some of them. One day, I'm packing groceries on the front end. You know, the front end where all the customers are? And the first time I witnessed the floor of the penthouse crack and land on the shoulders of all the hardworking people that day. She's on the phone. She's on the phone talking to her boss, the supervisor. But that look on her face, you should have seen it. It said everything. I overheard there was some kind of a pressure from the penthouse to achieve a big quota. And I could literally see her shoulders slump from that weight. And then the mental health had started fracturing all over the floor. Oh yeah, I could see her boss on the other end of that phone. Like in the movie Horrible Bosses, sleep deprived, undernourished, over-caffeinated, financially driven. Wait a minute, that was me. I could see me, the well-dressed corporate zombie. My mind had started shifting in that moment. But it wasn't until that moment that I made this deep personal commitment to stop living the stigma of mental health, embracing my own courage to start lifting that stigma of mental health and sharing my stories of struggle. So you want to know what I did next? I called a meeting with the general manager of that warehouse. And I sat down with him in his room because, you see, I wanted to lead by example. And I told him my story, my whole story, just like I'm telling all of you here today. You see, leaders, they can play a crucial role in normalizing the discussions around mental health. Absolutely they can. They can use their voices like megaphones to start lifting that stigma of mental health and make mental health issues to be seen as accepted, not stigmatized in the workplace. They can create a culture where physical health and mental health are to be seen as one. And they can create that courage culture I talked about. Remember the courage to find their own vulnerability and break open that silence and share their stories of struggle and creating a safe place for all of us to have an honest conversation about how we're really feeling and making it okay to say when you're not okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.